I don't think people understand the true extent of the conflict in the Gaza Strip. This densely populated Palestinian territory is once again embroiled in a deadly cycle of violence. Israeli forces have launched a major military operation, tightening their grip on the border and conducting raids into Rafah, a city in southern Gaza. Witnesses describe scenes of intense fighting, with Israeli airstrikes targeting alleged militant positions and Palestinian factions responding with rocket fire. The sound of explosions and gunfire has become an all-too-familiar soundtrack to life in Gaza. The international community is watching with growing concern, urging both sides to show restraint and prevent further bloodshed. Human rights organizations have also voiced their alarm, highlighting the devastating impact of the conflict on innocent lives. The path to peace remains elusive, but the search for a way out of this endless cycle of violence must continue. The Israeli military has justified its actions in Gaza as a necessary response to what it perceives as an imminent threat from Palestinian militants.
They maintain that the targets of their strikes are carefully selected to minimize civilian casualties, and that they are taking all necessary precautions to avoid harming non-combatants.
However, critics argue that the scale and intensity of the Israeli offensive are disproportionate to the threat posed and raise serious concerns about the use of excessive force. Human rights groups have accused Israel of violating international law by targeting civilian infrastructure and imposing a crippling blockade on Gaza. Israel also blames Hamas, the Islamist group that governs Gaza, for the suffering of its people, accusing it of diverting resources towards military activities instead of investing in the well-being of its population. The lack of trust and understanding between the two sides continues to fuel the cycle of violence, making it increasingly difficult to envision a path towards a peaceful resolution. As the conflict rages on, it is the civilian population of Gaza that bears the brunt of the violence.
The relentless bombardment has left countless homes and buildings reduced to rubble, displacing families and leaving them without shelter, food, or access to basic necessities. Hospitals in Gaza are struggling to cope with the influx of casualties, with shortages of beds, medicine, and trained medical personnel. The psychological toll of the conflict on the civilian population, particularly children who have known nothing but war and displacement, is immeasurable.
The international community has reacted with a mixture of condemnation, concern, and calls for restraint following the latest eruption of violence in Gaza.
The United States, Israel's closest ally, has reiterated its support for Israel's right to defend itself, but has also expressed concern about the humanitarian situation in Gaza and called for all parties to avoid civilian casualties. European countries have condemned the violence and urged both sides to show restraint, with some calling for an independent investigation into alleged war crimes. Human rights organizations have been vocal in their criticism of both Israel and Palestinian militants, accusing them of violating international humanitarian law. Amnesty International has accused Israel of using excessive force and indiscriminate weapons, while Human Rights Watch has condemned Palestinian militants for firing rockets indiscriminately into civilian areas. The international community faces a daunting challenge in trying to broker a ceasefire and prevent further bloodshed in Gaza.
As the dust settles on the latest round of fighting, the future of Gaza remains uncertain. The ceasefire, while fragile, offers a glimmer of hope for a respite from the violence. But the underlying issues that have fueled the conflict for decades remain unresolved. The humanitarian crisis in Gaza is dire, with the civilian population facing immense challenges in rebuilding their lives and coping with the trauma of war. The international community has pledged to provide humanitarian assistance to Gaza, but the scale of the devastation is overwhelming. The Israeli blockade, which has crippled the Gazan economy and exacerbated the humanitarian crisis, remains a major obstacle to recovery and development. The latest conflict has also exposed the limitations of the international community's ability to effectively address the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. While the headlines may focus on the political and military dimensions of the conflict, it is crucial to remember the human cost of the violence.
In the rubble-strewn streets of Gaza, families are left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. Parents mourn the loss of their children, their grief echoing through the empty rooms of their destroyed homes. Children, their innocence stolen by war, bear the psychological wounds of trauma and loss. The elderly, their twilight years overshadowed by violence and uncertainty, yearn for the peace they never knew. The humanitarian crisis in Gaza extends far beyond the immediate impact of the fighting. The international community has a moral obligation to provide humanitarian assistance to the people of Gaza and to work towards a just and lasting solution to the conflict.
The international community has a crucial role to play in breaking the cycle of violence and promoting a just and lasting peace between Israelis and Palestinians.
The international community must move beyond condemnations and calls for restraint and take concrete steps to hold both sides accountable for their actions and to create conditions conducive to peace. One of the most pressing priorities is to address the dire humanitarian situation in Gaza. The international community must provide urgent humanitarian assistance to those affected by the violence, including food, water, shelter, and medical care. The Israeli blockade, which has exacerbated the humanitarian crisis, must be lifted to allow for the free flow of goods and services into Gaza. In addition to addressing the immediate humanitarian crisis, the international community must work towards a political solution to the conflict. This requires a renewed commitment to a negotiated, two-state solution, based on international law and previous agreements. The peace process has been stalled for far too long, and it is time for the international community to revive it and create a meaningful framework for negotiations.
The path to a just and lasting peace between Israelis and Palestinians remains elusive, but it is not an impossible dream. Achieving peace will require both sides to make difficult choices, confront painful truths, and demonstrate a genuine commitment to coexistence. A lasting peace must be based on a two-state solution, with an independent and viable Palestinian state alongside Israel, living side by side in peace and security. This requires an end to the Israeli occupation, a just resolution to the refugee issue, and a shared capital in Jerusalem. Security is a fundamental concern for both Israelis and Palestinians. A peace agreement must address the security concerns of both sides, ensuring that Israel is free from the threat of terrorism and that Palestinians are free from the fear of occupation and violence. The economic well-being of both peoples is essential for lasting peace. The road to peace will be long and arduous, but it is a journey worth taking. Share this video and join the conversation. Together, we can make a difference.